Picking back up with phylum Annelida. Phylum Annelida. So this is going to be segmented worms. So these are worms that, well, you know an annelid, the earthworm. The earthworm is a great example of an annelid. We call them segmented worms because if you, in your head, imagine an earthworm, you can see that it has a whole bunch of lines all along its body. Well, if you were to actually look inside that earthworm, where every one of those lines are is actually a wall of tissue inside there. And it separates that earthworm's body into multiple segments all along those little lines. And that's why we call them segmented worms. They have segments. Their body is divided up into segments. There are 3 different important classes of animals in here. I'm only going to make you know one of the class names. So earthworms, class Polychaeta, and the leeches. These are the important organisms. As I said, segmented worms. They have 3 types of body tissues, the ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. They have bilateral symmetry. They have a complete digestive tract that runs from the tip of the head to the end of the tail. So the digestive system, the mouth is at the very, very tip of the earthworm. The anus is at the very, very tip of the tail. This is in contrast to a lot of the animals you know of, where they have an anus and then the tail runs past the anus. That particular trait is in the realm of a group of organisms we call chordates. Anyway, we'll get to them in a bit. But earthworms, they have the complete digestive tract, 2 openings. And then they are coelomate. So they have a coelom. Earthworms are the first class of animals here. It's not actually class earthworm or earthwormy or anything, but I'm not going to make you know the class name for earthworms. It's just that earthworms belong to their own class in phylum Annelida, and they have a very small brain, very rudimentary brain. There's not a lot of sense organs on earthworms. They have some hairs for sensing vibration. There's, they have some chemical sensors for sensing food, and that's about it. Most of their brain power goes to controlling their muscles, because earthworms have muscles all along their entire body to aid in movement, locomotion. So, one really cool trait of the earthworms is that they have 6 dorsal hearts. So, they have 6 little pumping structures that have the function of the heart in the earthworm. That means if you're an earthworm texting another earthworm, it's your earthworm significant other, you're like, I heart you. Oh, because you're an earthworm and you have 6 hearts. Leave me alone. Earthworms have an enclosed cardiovascular system. That means that all their blood is found inside blood vessels. So you have blood vessels going from the hearts to the body, and then blood vessels going from the body back to the hearts. And the entire time, all of the blood is always inside blood vessels. If the blood is not in the blood vessel, the earthworm has been wounded. So that's what an enclosed cardiovascular system is. And we do not see that in cephalopods. In cephalopods, they do have a heart, but that visceral mass where all the organs were that you saw in the previous video, blood is just pumped from the heart loose into the visceral mass to bathe the organs there in blood. So they just sort of bathe in blood. They don't have much in the way of actual blood vessels, whereas an earthworm has a complete cardiovascular system, an enclosed cardiovascular system. The blood is enclosed in vessels. We have a ventral nerve cord running from head to tail. Ventral means belly. Dorsal means back. So when you look at an earthworm, its equivalent of the spinal cord is a ventral nerve cord, and that runs along its belly, starting from its brain at the tip of the head, all the way along the belly to the tail. And that ventral nerve cord helps to control muscle movement all along the earthworm's body. And then in every single one of those segments I mentioned, we have individual nerves moving out from the cord to the muscle cells themselves. And we have the little organs involved in fluid waste disposal. And every single segment has one of those. So it's pretty neat. Now, because of this segmentation, if you cut an earthworm in half, what happens? That's right! It dies. So, that was a lie that I was told as a child. I was told that if you cut an earthworm in half, then the earthworm will regenerate and you'll get 2 earthworms. Turns out if you cut an earthworm in half, you are cutting out half of its digestive system, half of its blood vessels, half of its body. Kind of bad. So most of the time, the grand majority of the time, if you cut an earthworm in half, you are killing an earthworm. If the earthworm miraculously survives, it will just regenerate a new tail, and then the other part you cut will break down and decompose. So, don't cut earthworms in half. It's mean. So here is your classic earthworm with its little tiny body segments. And if you were to be able to cut away like here, each of those segments has a little tissue wall all along it. And then running down the entire center of the earthworm is the digestive system. So this gray mass here is the digestive system running all along there. And then also running all along there are going to be the blood vessels moving all along its body. We have all 6 hearts right up here. And then we have all of our little reproductive organs right up front as well. So, and our brain as well. And then this green bit is the ventral nerve cord running along the belly. And then we have little pointy bits here showing that there are excretory organs, those fluid waste disposal organs, in every single segment. And there are nerves running from the green cord in every single segment connecting to the muscles. So, this is your earthworm. They can get surprisingly large. This is a non-photoshopped picture of a very large earthworm. I think this one's Australia. I think they also get that big around Chernobyl, the Russian nuclear power plant that melted down in the 70s. So that's pretty sweet. Or was it the 80s? I think it was the 80s. Anyway, next up is class Polychaeta. So this is the class name you need to know. And amazingly enough, class Polychaeta contains the polychaetes. Ooh. Polychaetes are marine segmented worms. So these are the segmented worms that live in the oceans, the saltwater oceans. And they crawl along the seafloor or they burrow in the sandy bed of the seafloor. They tend to have hard bristles. So the bristles along the sides of their bodies, in an earthworm you could barely see them. We can, in this diagram we see these little points here showing bristles. If you pick up an actual earthworm, good luck on actually seeing those bristles. But polychaetes have hard, thick, stiff bristles that are useful in movement. And they tend to be divided up into the sessile tube worms and the free-living worms. Tube worms are polychaetes that basically burrow into the ground and they secrete they build a tube to live in. And then they have these sort of really cool advanced mouth parts around their mouth that filter food out of the water. And so when they go to feed, they come out of their tube and then they stick out their feathery mouth parts and they collect food, and then they can come back into their tube and get the food out of the feathery mouth, or out of the feathery appendages and into their mouth. So they're pretty cool. And then the free-living worms are just segmented worms that crawl around and move. So up top we have tube worms living in their little tubes. The tubes are not a part of their body. Rather, they're a secreted substance that hardens into a tube. So if you break a bit of tube, you are not killing the worm, but you are breaking its home. So you can see here's one with its little feeding appendages sticking out, collecting food. Here's one that's either just pulled back into its tube or is coming out of its tube. But they can retract fully into their little tubes, these little feather worms. And then here's a cool looking one that's spiral shaped. I just thought that was really neat. Spiral shaped polychaeta tube worms there. And then here are two free living polychaetas. And you can see their bristles much, much larger than those of an earthworm. Much bigger bristles. And this one even has weird little tentacle-like projections around its mouth that are helpful in collecting food. And then here's one that looks a little bit closer to a classic earthworm. So sort of like a marine earthworm, except again, large, pronounced, stiff bristles. Very pretty, though, compared to our regular earthworms. Next up, the third organisms in the third type of organisms in phylum Annelida that you are responsible for knowing about are the leeches. Leeches! Everyone knows what a leech is, right? You get your hand in water and it attaches on and sucks your blood and ooh, that's a leech. Well, guess what? Very, very few species of a leech are parasitic. Those that are parasitic do, in fact, consume your blood. They attach on with their little sucker and they drink your blood. But the grand majority of leech species are free-living carnivores. They move around their own little ecosystem, preying upon teeny tiny little invertebrates, little organisms that don't have skeletons. And that's what an invertebrate is. Usually insect-like, but microscopic. And so they eat these little tiny organisms, and so they're predators, wily predators, patrolling their ecosystem for food. So most leech species are aquatic, meaning that they live in fresh water. They have gills for breathing. But there are some that are terrestrial, so they're not all aquatic. Leeches are actually approved, the good old-fashioned parasitic leech that you think of when I say leech, are approved by the FDA for clinical use. What kind of use could they possibly have in medicine? Well, their use is to do that thing they do so well. Those parasitic leeches drink blood, and that is fantastic. Why, you ask? Well, a surgical site tends to be a place where blood collects and it pools. And if it pools too long, it can clot, and blood clots can cause problems with healing. They can cut off blood flow and kill tissue. So you want to prevent blood clots. Well, guess what? Leeches prevent the clotting of blood, and they drink that pooled blood from the surgical sites. So they're all sorts of helpful. Hooray, leeches! Next time you have surgery, ask for leeches. So, pictures! This is your classic parasitic leech being used in a surgical setting. Attached here to a site where someone had finger surgery and making sure the blood doesn't clot. So helping this person recover from surgery. That's right. Getting a blood-sucking leech can speed your healthy recovery from surgery. Next up to the right, we have a free-living terrestrial leech. This is a little pretty carnivore. That's actually an attractive-looking animal right there. I would not mind having one in a little terrarium, a little glass terrarium. Just have some sticks and leaves and put some invertebrates in there to feed him and just have my pretty little carnivorous leech roaming around in there. That would be cool. And then at the bottom, we have some aquatic leeches here. So here are two aquatic leeches, and I think this one's parasitic, but this one is not. And then I think this is another terrestrial leech right here. Again, kind of attractive, showing some of that green coloration there and browns to help it blend in with the bottom, the rainforest floor there. So pretty cool the way you think about animals. Can be altered by just a little bit of extra knowledge. The fact that leeches are all not bloodsuckers. In fact, they can be a very important part of their ecosystem. Heck, even the bloodsuckers are an important part of their ecosystem. And you know what? They help us out. All right. Next up is phylum Nematoda. Nematoda is the roundworms. Roundworms are a little bit more primitive than annelids. They are not as advanced body structure-wise. They show the same kind of bilateral symmetry. They do have 3 tissues, ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, and they are pseudocoelomate. Unlike annelids, which will have the connective tissue on all the organs in their hollow cavity, the coelom, nematodes do not have connective tissue on those organs. It's a pseudocoelom. The connective tissue is around the sort of wall of the body cavity, but there's no connective tissue on the organs. Connective tissue on the organs means you're a coelomate. Connective tissue not on the organs means you're a pseudocoelomate. And of course, not having a body cavity means you're a coelomate. So, a little bit of review there for you. So, nematodes do have a complete digestive tract, however. They are non-segmented. So, when you compare a nematode to an annelid, they will not be segmented. There are both free-living and parasitic species of nematodes. By far, you are most likely to know of the parasitic nematode. The parasitic nematode that you guys are probably aware of is the heartworm, that thing you give your dog pills to prevent. Heartworms are a nematode parasite that can live inside the blood vessels in the heart of a dog and consume its blood and tissues and kill it. The free-living nematodes are actually very important decomposers in their natural environments. The parasitic nematodes include, as I just said, heartworms. So let's take a look at some nematodes here. Top picture is 2 free-living nematodes right here. In fact, I think all 3 pictures here are free-living nematodes. Very small microscopic organisms. Very simple, and they just consume the food in their little microscopic environments, munching on decomposing material, dead material, and breaking it down. And then over here, bottom right, is of course your parasitic nematode, the heartworm. So, that's all I got to say about that. That's probably more than 10 minutes worth, so now that we've completed phylum Annelida and phylum Nematoda, we will pick back up with phylum Arthropoda, which has some pretty cool classes to look at.